Hi everyone, happy to be here on the Global Power Platform Bootcamp Harare 2024. Super honored that I'm back here again and excited to be a part of it. Before we just jump into it, I'm going to quickly minimize my camera in a few moments to take away, not take away from the deck that we're going to go through now. And yeah, I'm going to pop up here and there during some really important stuff, but don't feel like I'm not here. I'm also honored by the fact that I was able to do a pre-recording of this session due to me being unable to present it live on Saturday. So I hope that's okay. Thank you for attending anyway and for watching this. So if we just jump straight into it, we're at the fifth year Global Power Platform Bootcamp in Harare. Thank you to all the organizers, firstly, that made it happen, both on the bootcamp side as well as the region side. Really, really appreciate it. It's phenomenal what the community can do when you come together, and initiatives like this are fantastic to be a part of. What we're going to be speaking about today is Power Platform security. Now, we're not going to go overcomplicated with security. We're going to talk about the basics, the fundamentals that we probably should all be aware of when building solutions within Power Platform. We're going to take it step by step, looking at little pieces here and there, and how we can combine them together to build a really nice security model. Throughout the presentation, we're going to build on little pieces that may seem insignificant at the beginning, but hopefully by the end of it, we'll actually see something really majestic, something that's really pretty, or at least I like to think is pretty. Um, One other thing I'll give you a heads up on is I showed this to my wife before I did the recording, and she said to me that I've got the same diagrams over and over and over again. So I apologize if they look like the same diagram. It's not me being lazy. It's not me trying to get out of doing something. They actually speak for themselves. It's just to try explain what the process looks, and they happen to look very similar. So hopefully it's not just a copy and paste. Hopefully it makes sense. Before we get into the presentation itself, just want to introduce myself. My name is Nati Turtledove. I'm a solutions architect at CarePoint 365. I've been building the Power Platform now for quite a couple of years. I started a while back as a Power BI developer and a data engineer. I've then made my way over into Power Apps, Power Automate, a whole bunch of Power Platform stuff, to the point now where we're building some really exciting scalable solutions following best practice. I've come from a background of following some really strict ALM frameworks, talking about it, discussing how to do governance within the Power Platform. So it's something I'm very passionate about. I've got a whole bunch of Microsoft certifications, which mean not much at the moment. Something that's really exciting that happened to me is I'm originally from Cape Town, South Africa, and recently I've made the move over into the UK. So it's really good to be here in Manchester. It's good to be a part of the Power Platform community in the UK, a very, very special bunch of people. But I'm not going to forget my homies back in South Africa. We're going to miss you very much. But yeah, take opportunities when they come. Next, I'm just very community driven. I love being a part of the community. If you've ever engaged with any community members out there, I feel that they're just very welcoming and embracing. We're here to on a journey together to build within the Power Platform. We're not here about egos. We're not here about challenging each other. It's welcoming. It's warm. Everyone wants to be a part of it. Kind of makes it sound like a cult, but it's not. Sorry, I shouldn't say that word. Anyways, yeah, it's fantastic to be a part of the community. We're here for each other. That's how we grow. That's how we learn. But yeah, that's a bit about me. So if we dive into this topic, we're probably all familiar with what these little icons on this page represent. We've got the broader Power Platform where we've got Dataverse, AI Builder, Managed Environments, PFX, etc., and Managed Connections, which is an icon I left off here. I'm terribly sorry about that. Connection references. Those all kind of form the baseline of what the Power Platform is built on top of. The next bit is we've got all the products. We've got Power Apps, Automate, Power BI Pages, and the new one, Copilot Studio. Those are the products that are built on top of the infrastructure, such as Dataverse, PFX, AI Builder, etc. Now, if you've meddled with one of these products, such as Power Apps on its own, or you've used Power Automate before, you're probably familiar with building some of these products and solutions. The piece that we get to now is, okay, well, we're building all of these objects within a solution, but how do we lock it down from a security level to make sure that it complies with government related security concepts such as GDPR, users can't see specific data or they're not meant to see it, etc. Those are kind of the topics we're going to look at now within this presentation. So there I am back in the corner. Hi. Um, there are a variety of security concepts when it comes to Power Platform. Some we're going to talk about within this presentation. Some we'll hopefully touch a bit later on in the coming future, just because we've only got a certain amount of time and we don't want to dive too much into detail. But from a starting level, we've got users. Who's got access to your environment or to your tenant? That's the starting point, is who do you give access to? Following that, it's kind of linking up security roles, business units, teams, and record ownerships together. So, security roles, what data do you have access to within that environment on an entity level? So, do you have access to a sales table, to a purchasing table, etc.? And then breaking that up into business units is okay, well, we've got the sales table, but what business unit do you form part of? Are you forming part of a department that's only got access to certain data within these tables? Do you want to see data within an entire organization, etc.? And that's where the security roles, business units, and record ownership kind of align with each other, but we'll get into that a bit later on. We've got teams where we can start driving access to tables, record ownership based on a user or based on a team access, or if we can start allowing intra-ID security groups to govern security roles from AAD directly into Dataverse using teams and assigned business units and security roles. The next bit is record ownership. Who actually owns the data? Is it organizational owned? Is it team owned? Is it going to be owned by the user creating the record, i.e. Steve creating a sales record within the sales table, etc.? And that also forms part of building up a bit of a security model with security roles, business units, and teams. I've said that quite a lot. I'm really sorry. Anyways, branching over to another piece of security concepts in the Power Platform is the manager and position hierarchy model, which is something we're going to discuss in this presentation as well. Sometimes security roles aren't always going to solve your security issues that you need to implement. So you can look at other concepts out there, things like column profile security, column security profiles as well, how those work within tables and how we can assign them to individuals. And then lastly, security governance, how you manage security layers going forward. So if you're going to have testing, testing done on some records, making sure that you test within your security guidelines, that you're deploying data accordingly, that you've locked down your environment using DLP policies, you've got retention policies, etc. All those type of concepts fall within the Power Platform. Some are done by a user side, some by an admin, some by a tenant. All things that kind of need to be considered when building security models within Power Platform. So if we touch on the first item on users, when we create an environment, most of the time, well, not most of the time, all the time, we're presented with the option to assign a security group to that environment. And what that practically means is when you assign a security group to an environment, the members that are part of that security group, which is intra-ID driven, will have access to that environment and then be able to interact with security roles related to them. Can they create apps? Can they access data, etc.? Now you have got the option to not add any security group by selecting none. It opens up the ability for people to be able to access the environment if they don't have access to it. It also means that it's a very, very manual process to continue adding users to environment. You're going to have to go to the environment and add the users manually. But if we use intra-ID security groups to then drive an environment security group, it could kind of look like this infrastructure over here where we've got three different environments. We've got a development environment where our developers need to log into to do dev. We've got a testing environment for our testing team that conduct testing on the dev work. And then lastly, we've got our production environment where the live solution lives and all the end users interact with that product. So if we were to manage these three environments with assigned security groups, we'd have three intra-ID security groups. One for the developers that host all the developers that need access to that environment, one for the testers, and one for the users, which may be company-wide, allowing all the users access to that environment to then interact with the live production application. So using this concept, if we say we add three developers, Steve, Tony, and Mark, to our dev intra-ID security group, and that's then assigned to our development environment, we know that those three users then will sync to the environment and then will have access to it. Now, if Roger, who is not part of that development group, tries to access the development environment, he would not then be able to access it. Now, the downside about using intra-ID security groups assigned to environments is that there could be sometimes a bit of a lag when when you add new people to a group and you want them to access it as soon as possible. So some of the workarounds that you can use is you can, once you add them to the Entra ID group, you can go directly into the environment and you can add the user manually, or you can run a quick flow with a force sync user action. So what this flow basically does, and we'll look at how it's going to work with this slide, is when we add a new user to our Entra ID security group, i.e. to our developer security group, this will then trigger a flow using the trigger when a group member is added or removed from that group object ID that we'll copy and paste. And then we'll say, we'll open up the Power Platform for admin action for sync user. That will then say, for this specific environment, my Avengers environment, let's take the user ID that we've now added to this group from our trigger action, and we'll insert that into the object ID field for the force sync user. And what this will do is it will force sync that object ID into the environment and then add them to the system user table in that environment. So you can rest assured that whenever you add a new member to a security group, your flow in the background is going to manually sync them to the environment, ensuring that they've got access as soon as they've been added to the group. I'm just looking now. Some of my text has been overlapped by some stuff, which is not great. Originally, I was using PowerPoint, and because of the whole recording function, I moved over to Keynote on Mac, which is actually pretty nice, but it's changed all my fonts, which is not great. Anyways, that's how we can use force sync user actions to pass new users in an environment, a security-driven group, to that specific environment. The next bit that we're going to be talking about is data segmentation with business units. So if you're not familiar with business units, we're not going to dive too much into it right now. We're just going to kind of explain what this type of model, how they work. When you're setting up an environment, you've got your default parent business unit in there, usually with some random numbers and text. Excuse me. Ideally, when you do set up a new environment, you want to rename this to something more practical. Once you've got that parent business unit set up, you can then create child business units, and that's called segmenting your data. So you'd have a child business unit that's got access to the accounts table, customers table, sales table, purchase orders, and inventory as well. But it means that members that are then a part of these two security groups, business units, would only be able to see data relevant to their business unit within these tables. So you can see we've got a little brick layered wall between each of these child business units that stop the users from being able to see data across it. Now, this is obviously driven by security rules, which we'll see a bit later on. But the concept is, if a record for a child business unit is created within that business unit, it lives within that business unit now. Doesn't mean it lives in a new table, but it means the owning business unit for that record within the accounts table then belongs to that child business unit. So if we were to kind of bring this into theory and say we've got an environment called the Turtle Life. It's a sales company that's got different branches all over the city, different physical locations, but because everyone's using the same app or same solution to capture sales, they all log in with the same environment. However, they want to separate their data to make sure that each location's sales and transactions belong to that location, not to the Turtle Life organization as a whole. So that have shop A, B, and C. It can be in 3 different locations, and those would be our 3 child business units for the big Turtle Life parent business unit. So in the example over here, we're saying Steve, who's part of a business unit, goes ahead and creates a record based on that table ownership type. If it's an organizational ownership type, if it's a team one or direct user one, that user then would become the owner of that record. His business unit would become the owning business unit of that record, or if it's organizational owned, the org or owning team business unit would become the owner of that record. Or if it's a team access one, the team would become the owner of that business unit, of that record, and their assigned business unit would be the owning business unit. So what that practically means is, if you look at this next diagram, we've still got our shop A, shop B, and shop C business units with all access to the accounts, customers table, etc. But Steve in shop A creates a record based on how those tables are set up. Let's just say now he's the direct owner of it. He becomes the record owner of that sales transaction because he forms part of the business unit shop A. That record is then owned by the business unit shop A, meaning that people in shop B can't see that record. And vice versa, if Tony in shop B decides to create a sales transaction, and again, he becomes the owner of that record, because he falls under the shop B business unit, that record now is owned by the shop B business unit. So we can see we've got a nice brick wall between the concepts of our business unit and tables, and a nice brick wall between how the process would work when users actually create data belonging to their business unit. Now, if we wanted to start sharing this data across different business units, we'd have to do that either via record assignment or through sharing and then security groups, which is something we're going to dive into now. So unless we've enabled org-wide access across all the business units to then view org-wide data, you won't be able to see each other's data unless you've got an assigned security role that lets you view across the different areas, or if you have manually assigned or shared that record with other users across different business units, etc. The one thing that we haven't delved into now, and it's probably not going to happen, is modernized business units. This is working off the legacy business units. If we consider modernized business units where a user can be a part of multiple business units, it gets a bit more complicated with who actually owns that record and how it can be assigned to various business units. But that's not something we're going to discuss in this post for now, in this presentation for now. If we move over to our next piece, security roles, this is going to be two parts, and we're going to have a bit of an interruption in between. Starting with the basics of security roles, we can assign some of the four main ones that are known out there to users, which don't give them access to data levels, but more functionality within the Power Platform. So for instance, within the environment maker security role, that just basically gives users the ability to create Canvas apps, to create cloud flows, initiate their own connection references. And if you look really carefully for that one, you can see we've got the connector icon that I left out from the first slide. So again, I apologize for that. They've also got access to gateways and data flows. They can create model-driven apps, potentially create solutions and add objects to that. It's kind of enabling makers within an environment. We've then got an environment admin who can manage that specific environment, what access that they've got. We've got a system customizer who can make changes to the environment on a data level. So can you add tables to Dataverse? Can you create AR models that can then be used in other apps, etc.? And then lastly, we've got the system admin who's got full control. They can create Canvas apps, they can share apps, they can create connectors, they can create data flows and gateways, Dataverse tables, create and export solution frameworks, create AR data models, etc. Those are kind of the four primary roles that Microsoft elaborate on, and what we probably need to be aware of when assigning responsibilities to users to interact with Power Platform, part of the enablement phase. What this doesn't cover is security roles on an entity basis with what data they have access to. If you were to say deploy a solution to end users who wanted to use a product, not make the product or be a part of enablement of making it. So if we were to start looking at security roles on a data level from locking up data, we need to jump into something pretty fundamental when it comes to security. This is where I'm going to come into camera again because it's really important. Hi. Something called the principle of least privilege. So the principle of least privilege basically defines locking up data at the lowest level possible and then adding additional layers on top of that to slowly release data as need be. So ideally, in a situation where you've got security roles, the first role that you'd probably assign to most people would have to little access as possible. So limit user access as little as necessary. Don't give them access to tables they don't need, etc. And try not to give org-wide data unless it's really, really required. Just a bit of a topic over here is when we say limit user access to minimum data necessary. If you're customizing a new security role, something that Parvez recently mentioned to me on a blog post I wrote is it's very important if you are creating security roles, rather copy one. So copy either the basic security role and work off that instead of creating one from scratch, because that tends to leave out some basic entity requirements or access that you may need from an environment level. Also, when you are interacting with security roles, don't interact with or edit the ones that are managed, i.e. the ones default in the environment, the basic one, the system customizer one. Again, rather copy them and make them more specific to what you're building. Otherwise, you're going to run into a whole bunch of issues with deployments with managed layers, which is another discussion for another time. Anyways, so we've locked down a security role to the least amount of access across the environment's tables. Now, as you need to unpick different layers and start sliding these little, I kind of like to see it as the game of, you ever played the monkey games where you've got the bars and you slide out these little poles, and as you slide out, more monkeys fall through. So the more poles you've got in at the beginning, the monkeys stay on top. But as you start to pick out some of these poles, monkeys start to fall through. So only as you need to, you start picking out different little poles and assigning more access to additional roles that grant further access to this data. So we then kind of group them into privileges. We'll have a base security role with little data. We'll have another security role with a bit more, etc. And by doing that, we start to implement a bit of a granular release phase where we start adding additional layers with more access as we go along. And following this principle is imperative when you're building security roles because you don't want any data breaches. So it takes some time getting used to because you may miss things at the beginning. I still do. I've messed up recently as well. I created a role that had way too much access. But it's a concept that as you get more and more familiar with it, you'll see how your security model becomes a lot more robust and a lot more reliable. So considering the principle of least privilege, and again, this hasn't been applied to the slide, so I'm backtracking on my own words, we can look at a security role that we've created for demo purposes. Considering we're working for the Total Life shop and we've got a variety of different locations, shop A, shop B, and shop C, we've created a security role called sales. And what this security role would do is it's got access to the customers table, the sales table, purchase orders, and inventory. Now, if we try to break it up and understand how the security role actually works, from a customer side, a user that's been assigned to this sales security group, i.e. Steve, who's part of shop A, he's then got create, read, and write access on or an organizational level to the customer table, meaning that if a customer was created in shop B, but Steve forms part of shop A, he would still be able to see that customer forms part of shop B and edit it if necessary, as well as append and append to, meaning he can create sales orders in relation to that customer record, can relate data to that record. Now, the reason why I would want to give the sales team access to org-wide data on the customer table is, say you rock up to shop A to go buy a product, but you usually go to shop B because it's closer to you, just happen to be in this area now. You want to earn your reward points for shopping there. But if they don't have you on the system because they can't access your account because you usually shop in shop B, then you're going to miss out on all those points and you're going to be a very frustrated customer. And I know that as a fact because it's happened to me before. I've had one of those loyalty cards that only let you shop at one physical store. And if you were to go to another store, you wouldn't get the points, which is really frustrating. So by giving the sales security role access on an organizational level to the customers table, we're kind of enhancing a bit of customer satisfaction. They can still earn their loyalty points no matter what store you're shopping at. The next layer we're going to look at is on the sales table. So for this security role and this concept now, we're going to dive into another concept right after this, is as Steve, as a sales person on the sales floor assigned to the sales role, when I create a sales record, that record then belongs to me, Steve. And I am the only one who can read it, I'm the only one who can edit it, and I'm the only one who could potentially reassign it to individuals. So if Tony, who also works in shop A, wanted to see a sales transaction that I did for Kathy as a customer, Tony wouldn't be able to see that. Now, what we could do is we've got append and append to on the business unit level. So if people wanted to potentially share opportunities with that sales transaction, they could, but we're not going to focus on that right now. So as Steve, if I have this security role assigned to me currently, I own the record, no one else can see that record, it's locked up. Purchase orders is on a business unit level. We've got read only, so say a customer wants to buy a certain item, but we don't have any stock. With this role assigned, I can then see when shop A specifically has got a purchase order for this item again and when it's going to be coming in. So I can tell the customer, okay, well, we don't have this now, but the purchase order for shop A, I I can't see shop B's, I can only see shop A, says this item is coming in 3 weeks' time. And more of that is regarding inventory. We've got full organizational read access to the inventory table, as well as the append and append to, which I'll explain now. So if they do come asking for additional stock, you don't have this item in stock here, you can then go into the system and say, okay, well, we don't have it in stock. We've got a purchase order for our location coming in next week, but shop B happens to have it in stock now. And you can go to shop B and then go buy the item. So it's giving the customer a bit of oversight into what other locations would potentially have that stock item. And the reason why we've got append and append to is so you can create sales transactions with those items if need be. And if you wanted to place an order for a customer, probably should be a business unit append or append to. Again, I apologize, I have not used the principle of least privilege over here in this model. That's my bad. But ultimately, if this role would then be assigned to Mr. Steve, our hierarchy model would look something like this. We'd have a district manager who manages the location shop A. We'd have 2 sales managers that fall under the district manager that manage a team of salespeople. So we'd have an SMB sales manager and an enterprise sales manager. And say Steve, who falls under the SMB sales manager, he's then created the record. Now, if we follow the security role that we've just seen, where it's on a user read-only level security role, it means that no one else in this entire shop or the entire organization would be able to see Steve's transaction. Not Tony, not Thor, not his sales manager, not the district manager, because it's user record owned. So that could be kind of frustrating in a scenario where a sales manager wanted to see how his team is performing, or the district manager wanted to see how his shop is performing. So if we were to maybe take this concept and scale it a bit more and adjust the security role to be a bit more elaborative of what data they could see, okay, we could say use the exact same concept, but instead of on a user level only for the sales table where we're looking at read, etc., we change that to a business unit level, meaning that Steve still owns the record when he creates a sale, and only Steve can edit it. But people that fall within the shop A business unit can then also view that record as well. And if they wanted to create notes on that record because they've got a pen and a pen too, they could potentially do that as well. So if we were to update our security role to look something like this, and we then look back, I told you we've got the same model quite a lot. We look back at our organogram with how this works. We've got the district manager on top again. We've got both our sales managers, and then we've got all the sales team. Because Steve has created this record, and yet he still owns it himself, but the sales security role, which by the way will be assigned to all users in the company, because say it's a bad day and Tony's off, the district manager also kind of needs to be able to create sales orders on the floor, help out his team, be a good team player, right? So they've all got the sales security role, but because it's on a business unit read level for the sales table now, the entire shop can then see Tony's sale. So it's a step higher from locking it down on a per user level, but in some scenarios it might not be great because now everyone's got access to that sales record to actually view it. So there are different approaches that we can take to building the security role, which we'll touch in another piece very, very shortly. So taking the security role into theory, where we've got that business unit privilege assigned to the sales table as a read-only privilege, if we were to compare it with another business unit, i.e. shop B, again, Steve has created that record. Steve owns it, and anyone in shop B can then view that record. But no one in shop A can view that record at all, not even the district manager, because it's on a per business unit level. Now, I haven't included this in the presentation, and I probably should have, but if we were to say create an additional security role that's, say, assigned to the district manager, that role would have organization privileges on the sales table, read-only, of course. And that additional layer of a security role, because we can have multiple roles assigned to a user, following the principle of least privilege, is locked down on the sales level, but the manager has got higher permissions to view data sales for the entire organization. When we assign that role to the 2 district managers, despite the record belonging to Steve and being locked up to the business unit, i.e. shop A only being able to see it, The two district managers will be able to see data and sales across both their business units. The district manager of Shop B will be able to see Steve's sale, and vice versa. The district manager of Shop B will be able to see, I've got the same names in there, but will be able to see sales that another salesperson created in Shop B. And that's how we can start using additional security layers, security roles as layers to open up what access users have to specific data. Fantastic. So that kind of covers security roles. The next piece we're going to talk to, and look, I'm back again because it's an important topic, is the hierarchy model. So within Power Platform, again, we've got various security concepts. The hierarchy model is configured in the admin center. So if we go to the admin center, select an environment, go to settings, users and permissions, we'll see we've got a section there called hierarchy model. It's configured per environment. It's not Entra ID or AAD driven, which I'll explain now. But ideally, the hierarchy model is dependent on the system users table, which is a table derived per environment. So similar to our environment security group that drives access to an environment. When a user is added to that security group, they get added to the environment. What that force sync user flow was actually doing was it was syncing the user to the system user table in an environment. And that's what the hierarchy model is also based on. So when you configure a hierarchy model, it will take you to the user table within that environment. You'll see all the users that have got access to it, and you can start configuring it as you need. Now, when we say it's not AAD driven, this is more relevant to positions and managers, which are two types of hierarchy models. If we say are working with Entra ID or Office 365, when you create a user, most of the time you assign them a manager in Office 365 or Entra ID, and you kind of put their position in as well. The hierarchy model is not driven by that. Because it's on a system user table per environment, these need to be configured separately. So if you've got a manager assigned to you in AAD, but you don't have it in the, what doesn't necessarily mean it's going to pull through to the user table in that environment. Now, if there's anyone out there that knows there's a sync or a button that you can enable that does this for you, let me know. I've worked countless hours to try workarounds to bring them to speed and kind of make them talk to each other. I may have missed something completely simple out there, so definitely ping me if there's a way to sync the two. But the way that I've done it before is we just created a basic flow that retrieves the users from that environment, looks them up from Office 365, gets their manager, and then just updates the user table in that environment with that manager or with that position. So it just kind of syncs it together. One other thing about the hierarchy model is that you can define your access depth, meaning if you've got an organogram that defines a 3-tier company structure, you've got your district manager, your sales managers, and then your sales team, that's technically an access depth of 3. So if you were to set your access depth to 3, it means that you're giving access across 3 levels, where if you set it to 2, you're only restricting it to 2 levels, which I'll explain really shortly with another beautiful diagram. So you can define the access depth on how far you want access to go along your manager hierarchy or your position hierarchy. The other thing about the hierarchy model is that you can align it with specific tables. So it doesn't mean that it's now active amongst all your tables within an environment. You can configure it to say I only want it to be available for my sales table or for my customers table, etc. So that can be defined when setting up the hierarchy model. So taking that into consideration, let's discuss what the two models are. Just a bit of water. So our two models are the manager hierarchy model and the position hierarchy model. Both are pretty self-explanatory. The manager hierarchy model basically defines looking at the user's assigned manager and saying, okay, well, if you're my direct manager, you can then see my record. Again, it's based on the system users table, not AAD. So in the system users table, if you've got an assigned manager over there, you've configured it yourself, or you've got that flow that imports it in from Entra ID or AAD, or you've told me that there's a button that auto syncs it. Fantastic. That's a new thing for me. Please do. That's what the manager hierarchy model will be dependent on. Who's your assigned line manager based on the system user table. Now, similar to the position hierarchy model, there's an initial step we need to take first is we actually need to create the positions. They don't come from Entra ID or AAD either. So when you're configuring positions, you'll create various positions called district manager, and then you'll create another position called SMB sales manager and enterprise sales manager, or you can call it the same thing called sales manager. And that role would then report to your district manager. And then you'd create another position called sales team. And then that sales team will report directly to the sales manager position. Once you've configured that in the positions table within the hierarchy model, similar to the manager one, you've got a positions field on the system user table as well. So you'll be able to define then what position a user will have, and that will ultimately build your hierarchy as well. So if we were to consider the manager hierarchy model, as we've discussed, we'd say Steve reports to the SMB sales manager, and the SMB sales manager reports to the district manager. Again, all these users are assigned with that sales security role. And if we're going to be using the role, the initial role that we created, where it's locked down on a per user privilege, so only Steve can see his record, etc. Because we've implemented the manager hierarchy model, because Steve has got a direct manager called the SMB sales manager, that sales manager can view and edit Steve's sales record despite having the security role that it's a user privilege read level only. You can then see that the enterprise sales manager and the rest of the other sales teams don't have access to that record because they don't form part of the manager hierarchy model that Steve is a part of. If, say, Anthony on the far right side were to create a sales record, he would then own it, but his sales manager, the enterprise sales manager, would then be able to see it as well. So what's important to note as well is that although the SMB sales manager can view Steve's record and interact with it, if we were, again, following our access depth level of 3, the district manager would then also have access to Steve's record, but he wouldn't have access to edit it, he'd only have access to view it. If we were to say lock up that access depth to 2, our district manager would be cut out the picture completely, and only the SMB sales manager would be able to see and edit Steve's record. Now, similarly, if the SMB sales manager were to create a sales record himself, following the manager hierarchy model, the district manager, again, would be able to interact and see the sales manager's record. So that's how the manager hierarchy model kind of restricts and, releases data following a hierarchy model without having to mess around with further security roles. So this, if we look at the security role where it was a per user record level following this model, it's a lot more safer and secure to have it at a per user level with a manager hierarchy model enabled than to take the adjusted security role where we enabled the sales table to be on a per business unit read privilege. That would have allowed everyone to see it. But user level, following the manager hierarchy role, we've locked it up and we've only given managers access into that record. If we were to say use the position model hierarchy, similar to what we discussed, we've got the sales district manager position, we've got the sales manager position, and the sales position. Steve is assigned the sales position. Both the sales managers, enterprise and SMB, are assigned the sales manager, and the district manager is assigned the district manager position. If Steve were then to recreate a record, again following the principle of where it's on the sales table is a user privilege read only, despite Steve owning that record, and you can see none of the sales team can then see it, because that role, that position, sales, reports directly to the sales manager, both the sales managers, SMB and enterprise, will be able to see and interact with Steve's sales record. And again, the district manager would be able to see Steve's record, but not interact with it. And that's, again, following the 3-tier access depth that we set within the model hierarchy. That kind of covers how the manager and position model hierarchy model work, and how we can then align that with the security roles to lock up data through the security roles, but enable a bit more data release through a different model that's not a security group. Again, following the principle of least privilege. If we then move over to the next piece, teams. Teams is a fun one. It is an interesting one. It's been driving me crazy the past couple of days, but getting through it. When you're dealing with a couple of hundred users in an environment, and you need to start giving them access to different roles, to different apps, etc. Instead of doing it manually through the admin center, we can start syncing user access based on security groups. So similar to the Entra ID environment security group driving who's got access to the environment, we're using the same concept for how roles can be inherited. So if we take into consideration over here, we've got 3 security roles. We've got our sales security role, the one we've been discussing. We've got a manager security role, something that we haven't really touched on yet. And we've got the district security role, which is what we mentioned briefly, something I didn't put into the presentation. We've got 3 security roles then that need to be assigned to 3 different areas. If we're working with 900 users and that splits about sales teams, manager teams, district teams, being able to assign those roles manually is going to be an absolute nightmare. And that's where teams can start helping as well. So in the admin center, we can, let's start with Entra ID. In Entra ID, we can create an Entra ID security group per role that we need. So we'll create a security group for sales, we'll create a security group for managers, and a security group for the district managers. What we'll then do is we'll then go into our admin center within the environment. We'll click on users and access privileges. We'll go to teams, and we would then create a new team. Oh gosh, just remembered something. Okay, after this, I'm going to take us back to security roles. Yeah. Anyways, we'll go and create a team. And when we create a team, we can assign it to a specific business unit. Ideally, we should be assigning it to the parent business unit, which I'll explain again with the security role, the thing that just came to mind. But when we're creating a team, you can also define the different types of teams. We could have an ownership team, so anyone a part of that team then becomes the owner of a record, have an access team, anyone part of that team's got access to specific records, or we can have an Entra ID, Office 365 ID driven team as well. So if we select that option and we say it's Entra ID aligned, if we're creating a team for the sales team and we want to line up with the security group we created for the sales team, we'll select the Entra ID sales group from the list, and we'll give them the membership, members and guests access type. Now what's important to note is when it comes to the access types for Entra ID security groups and teams, when it says owners, it's not speaking about being able to own the record, it's speaking about the owners of that security group. So ideally you want to set it to members. When you set that, when you create that team, so now we've got this team in Dataverse called sales team, and it's driven by the Entra ID security group called sales, we can then assign the sales security role to that team. So then going forward, any user that's added to the sales Entra ID group team will auto inherit the sales security role. Now, usually when you add a new user to a group and they inherit the role, that role doesn't take effect until that person physically logs into the environment. So say I add Roger to the sales team. He's a new employee for our sales team. He needs to get the sales security role assigned to him. I add him to the sales security group. From a process perspective, he's now in that Entra ID group and that security role, and he's also in the environment security role. Sorry, he's in the environment security group. So make sure he's got access to the environment. Because he's now part of this security role and we've got this team set up, the process defines that Roger should inherit the sales security privilege. But if I, as his manager, wanted to perform a function on behalf of him, say we've got an HR system and we needed to create a staff member for him and align it with his AAD security group, but we wanted to assign it to him so he becomes the owner of it. Because he hasn't actually entered the environment yet, that role hasn't actually synced with his account. So he might have it theoretically from the team's process, but it hasn't synced with his account. Only once he actually logs into that environment will that role actually sync then to the user. So there are ways to work around it. You can create another flow that says when a user is added to the security group, align up with what this role is, and then relate the security role ID to this user member. That's other complicated, etc. But there are workarounds to getting through it. So that's how we use Teams and to drive access not access, privileges aligned with security roles instead of having to assign them manually. One thing I wanted to go back on, and let's see if I can get into that presentation, the sales role. 1 second. Oh gosh, going back. Fantastic. When you're creating a security role, let's go to the business units. Yeah, let's just use this template over here. So we've got our parent business unit and our 3 child business units. When you're creating a security role, try avoid as much as possible as assigning that security role to a child business unit. Power Platform is smart, smarter than we think. If we were to say create a sales security role and it was auto assigned default to the parent business unit, i.e. Turtle Life, which is what it should be doing, Power Platform will auto cascade that security role amongst the business units that have been created. So if we actually look at the security role table, which is a standard table in Dataverse, and we create a security role called sales with the default business unit assigned to it, we look in that table, we'll see 4 security roles, all named sales, but one will belong to Turtle Life, the parent business unit, one will belong to shop A, one will belong to shop B, and one will belong to shop C, etc. If you go ahead and create a security group directly assigned to shop A first, we're breaking up that cascading rule. So if we were hypothetically creating a solution that needed to be deployed into other environments, because we're adding these security roles now to a solution and those security roles assigned to a child business unit, it will fail to add the object won't exist because the root component, i.e. the parent business unit, doesn't exist anymore. We bypass that cascading rule, so the role doesn't exist on a parent business unit level. And it will cause nightmares when you deploy because a child business unit has got its own ID and won't exist in another environment. Whereas the parent business unit, although it's got its own ID and it's got its own name, it's the default business unit, and Power Platform is smart enough to say, okay, well, if the role's assigned to a parent business unit, I know that when I deploy it to another environment, it's going to assign it to that default business unit in that new environment. So that's what I want to touch base on, and that brings me to putting it together. We've touched base on business units, we've touched base on environment security groups, we've touched base on security roles, manager model hierarchy, and teams to drive access to drive inheritance to security roles. It may look like a little pieces of the puzzle, but if we piece it together and look at what type of RBAC model we've kind of made, it looks kind of pretty. You see these things out there at times and you think they're overcomplicated, but by a few little steps that we've achieved today with creating one security role, 2, by creating a team, etc., we've built a pretty nice RBAC model. Now, what's missing from this model is if we look at the far left side with users, that will potentially be driven by the environment security group. So if they're assigned to that Entra ID environment security group, fantastic. The users have then got access to that environment. But following this model, we've got our users pane, i.e. who am I? Do I belong in this environment? What is my business unit? Have I been assigned to shop A, shop B, shop C? What group am I a part of? Am I part of the sales group, the manager group, or the district manager group? And based on what group I'm assigned to, I then inherit the role that's related to that team in Dataverse. So because I'm a part of the sales group, I then inherit the sales role. And now because I'm assigned to a business unit as well, that role giving me different accesses to different privileges within business units to find, do I have read privileges to customers across all the business units? Do I have sales privileges to only shop A that I'm assigned to, etc.? Those roles then define what access we've got across all these areas and business units. And then lastly, all these then feed back into the hierarchy model. So we've restricted data on a business unit and a user level, but now following the manager hierarchy model, the position hierarchy model, we're starting to let a bit of data out without security roles, but following that concept. So if we break down into the hierarchy model over here, let's look on the far left-hand side where we've got the security roles. Again, this organogram is considering shop A, shop B, shop C on a 4-tier structure. Now we've got the admin on top who kind of manages all the shops. We've got a district manager then per shop. We've got an SMB and enterprise manager per shop. And then we've got a sales team per shop. So if we look at, for instance, shop A with everyone assigned to the sales security role, starting all the way at the bottom, that role defined that users have only got a user privilege for read, write, and edit on the sales table. So again, if Steve, part of shop A, creates that sales record, because we've enabled the manager hierarchy model, that little green arrow is saying, okay, well, my SMB manager has got read and edit access to that record that Steve created. And similar, if the SMB manager created a record, his direct manager would have access to that record as well. If we then look at the yellow lines, again, because Steve created that record and it's a user read only, the district manager will have view rights of that record directly, and similar to an SMB manager creating a role, a sales role, because that SMB manager owns it, the admin will potentially, again, following the manager hierarchy model, will be able to then see only and not edit that record. But any data above that, our red arrows are blocking. We're not able to see data outside of these roles or outside of our scope of function. So that's locking it down following principle of least privilege. If you look onto the far right hand side now, where we've enabled a district security role, so another granular layer on top of our sales security role, that can then get assigned to the district manager. That basically defines then saying, okay, well, we've got business unit business unit privilege to these type of tables. We've got organizational level reads to this table, etc. So as a district manager, despite the records being read only for users and owned by users, their district security roles overlapping that now and granting additional access, saying that they've got business unit read access, team read access, organizational read access on a user owned record, sorry. And that's kind of how this whole model is falling in place. So it looks pretty nice, actually. One thing I do want to mention, I'm just going to go back a slide over here, is when a user is assigned to a business unit. So again, Steve is assigned to shop A as a business unit, and he's inherited his sales security roles, and he's logged into the environment. He's got them assigned to him. He's now got the sales security role assigned to him. If we were to say change Steve's business unit and he were to now be promoted to work in shop B, not that shop B is a promotion or whatever, we need to be careful that the security role won't carry over and it needs to be reassigned. And that's basically on the concept that we mentioned earlier. When you create a security role on a parent business unit level, where it's defaulted to, it auto cascades and creates a security roles per business unit. So because Steve belongs to shop A originally, he's auto assigned the security role at the beginning that is owned by shop A in that cascading level. But now that because he's being assigned to shop B, that business unit doesn't match with that security role. So it's going to reset, and it may be that he needs to be reassigned that security role manually. And you can write other processes and flows that say, okay, retrieve it and reassign it to him manually. But note that when you are changing a user's business unit, there's a very, very high chance that that role is going to be lost somewhere. Anyways, yeah, that's security concepts from me, back to basics. It's been a really, really fun time talking to you. I hope you guys enjoyed this presentation. Oh yeah, I really wish I could have done this live. Thank you all very, very much for taking the time to listen and being a part of it. These are the fundamental building blocks of security concepts, to be honest. And although they may seem relatively basic, having an understanding of how to implement this from the bottom up really starts to drive a structured and secured security model within Power Platform. There's so many other pieces out there. There's IP restrictions, there's column security profiles, etc., that we can touch on. We're not expected to understand every piece of security layers in the Power Platform, but starting from the beginning and understanding the fundamentals and building on top of that and starting to scale, you avoid issues in the future where you've got too much data open to users, or you've set up your security model incorrectly. Now you need to start it from scratch. The baseline is the baseline. Principle of least privilege. Lock stuff up. Create security roles. Drive things by business units, etc. Those things will drive a very, very successful RBAC model in the future. Yeah, that's it from me. If you guys really enjoyed this presentation, if you ever want to reach out, discuss things specifically around driving hierarchy models with Entra ID. If you know where to do that, let me know. You can scan the QR code in the corner there. That will take you to my website with my blogs, with my videos, my samples on the Microsoft adoption site. But more importantly, there's a little page there called Let's Chat. I'm all about community. I love the community. I love engaging with people, getting to know each other. We always learn from each other. So there's a little page there called Let's Chat. That's direct link to my calendar. Just schedule a session if you ever want to have a call, if you ever want to meet, etc. And it will be great to get to know you. But other than that, this has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the bootcamp. Cheers.